When I was a kid, my father was one of the big DJs in New York. He was at times the biggest DJ in New York, and he worked on a station that played what was then called MOR music, middle of the road. It wasn't rock, it wasn't classics, it was the kind of old-fashioned American songbook. And these were the songs that were written 20 years before I was born. A lot of them, they were written on what used to be called Music Row, or and they were written by immigrants, people who came to America, who loved America, Jews, Irish people, guys like Irving Berlin and George M. Cohan, and Irving Berlin wrote God Bless America. He wrote White Christmas. They actually wanted to be part of the country. Tin Pan Alley, it was called. That's what they called it. And George M. Cohan wrote She's a Grand Old Flag, all kinds of patriotic songs. But the song that exemplified this MOR music to me, and remember, I was a little kid, I was listening to my father in the morning, and this was the music I heard. And the song that exemplified this for me was Cole Porter's I Get No Kick from Champagne. And Cole Porter was a very upper class guy from Indiana, a gay guy from Indiana who brought this kind of sophistication and simplicity to his lyrics. Now, in a lot of these old songs, people don't know this, the part that the songwriter often paid the most attention to and brought the most sophistication to and the most cleverness to was the intro which was rarely actually played on the radio. They usually got right to I Get No Kick from Champagne. So here's Frank Sinatra on a show hilariously called Music for Smokers Only, with smoking a cigarette and singing the intro to I Get No Kick from Champagne. This was the kind of song I listened to as a little kid.
And I suddenly turn and see your fabulous face.
And then he goes into the main part of the song, I Get No Kick from Champagne. Incredibly sophisticated lyrics, operating on a level of sophistication, portraying sophistication. I'm fighting vainly the old ennui. I've got everything in the world. I'm just so bored with life, but I want to get a kick from something, but I get no kick from champagne. The original second verse started, some they may go for cocaine, but I think that if I took even one sniff, it would bore me terrifically too. Later they changed it to perfume from Spain or whatever else they could find to rhyme with it because they found out about cocaine. And the final verse has one of the most sophisticated rhyming schemes ever, where he says, I get no kick in a plane, this was written in the 1930s, so a plane was a pretty elite thing to have been in, but I get no kick in a plane. Flying too high with some guy in the sky is my idea of nothing to do. So that's a really passel of rhymes, and yet it sounds very much like natural speech in what must be like 19 or 20 syllables. It's a lot of rhymes. All right, so now I'm 9 or 10 years old. And my father comes home one day, and my father really knew, his business was to know pop music. And he said, boy, oh boy, I just heard the future. I just heard the greatest stuff I've ever heard, this new band out of England called the Beatles, right? Now, I was aware of the Beatles because they were coming to be, when I was about 10, they came on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I knew that there was a lot of excitement about it, and as a little kid, you kind of want to be part of the excitement of teenagers, people who were a little older than that, and my father came home and he played this album for me, and here's a song, of course, everybody's heard, just a little taste of it, the Beatles. So 10 years old, I objected immediately. I said, this is excellent. We're really going from flying too high with some guy in the sky is my idea of nothing to do to she loves you. Yeah. I saw her yesterday. That's really an advance. We're going forward in this. I thought it was awful. I loved lyrics. I loved sophisticated lyrics. And I just thought it was terrible. Now, there had always been rock. All my lifetime, in the 50s, there was rock and roll and there was bebop and all this. But the point is, Sinatra didn't sing it. The kids listened to it, but Sinatra didn't stoop to singing Teen Angel or Duke of Earl. But the Beatles, of course, transformed everything. And ultimately, they kind of made Sinatra and his ilk kind of obsolete. What was middle of the road became kind of off the road to the side. Now, here's the thing about the Beatles, and people always misunderstand how I feel about this. They were amazingly talented, but artists produce a snapshot of their times. The times cause the artist, and then the artist proceed to cause the times. And what I didn't realize, of course, because I was just a little kid, but what I realized later on was we were seeing more than just the end of sophisticated lyrics. We were seeing the end to upper-class aspirations. So go back to I Get No Kick from Champagne. Go back to Sinatra. Now, remember, Sinatra was a knockabout guy from Hoboken, New Jersey. He was not, Francis Sinatra III. He was like this immigrant kid coming up because he had a voice, coming up from the bottom, coming up from the slums, right? But he was talking about, I'm fighting vainly the old ennui, and I see your fabulous face, such an upper-class thing to say. That not your pretty face, but your fabulous face, right? These upper-class tones of Cole Porter. Fred Astaire in his movies, right? He always played an ordinary guy, but then he got dressed up in top hat, white tie, and tail. So it was not the upper-class values, see, it was aspiration. Because the upper-class people were sometimes portrayed as snobs and people who didn't care and phonies, but their values were sound, right? You wanted to have good manners. You wanted to be chivalrous. You wanted to have good dress, sophistication, good grammar. Those things were considered universal. And the culture, the idea that there was a culture that we all considered good was also considered universal. There's a famous and very funny scene from the TV show MASH, where the kind of nebbish Radar wants to impress this very sophisticated girl, and Alan Alda as Hawkeye is explaining to him how you can get away. If she brings up Bach, here's what you do. And here's just this quick clip.
If she brings him up, you just smile and you say, bah.
Bah.
Smile a little bit. Smile.
Bah.
That's nice. Very good. It's not bad.
See, the girl doesn't fall for it in the end, but the point is that we all understand. We don't have to say anything. We don't have to talk. We all share this high culture, and that's all you have to say. And what the Beatles rock was a rejection of that. It was a rejection of aspiring to be elite. They were working class kids from Liverpool, and they sang like working class kids. And they also sang, at one point they did a cover of the Chuck Berry song from the 50s called Roll Over Beethoven. And that was saying, roll over Beethoven, tell Tchaikovsky the news. I got the rocking pneumonia. I need a shot of rhythm and blues. We're pushing the elite out, and we're bringing in this new working class sensibility. Peter Sellers, one of the great comic actors of his day, you might know him from Dr. Strangelove. He's kind of forgotten now, but he was really a funny guy. He did a routine where he would play a Shakespearean character, and he would recite the lyrics of the Beatles from A Hard Day's Night, which is obviously about a working class guy. He's working the night shift, but he's glad to come home to his beloved. And here's Peter Sellers reciting the lyrics in a fake Shakespearean voice.
It has been a hard day's night, and I have been working like a dog. It's been a hard day's night. I should be sleeping like a log. But when I get home to you, I find the things that you do will make me feel all right.
All right, it's a hard day's night. The joke is that the two attitudes cannot exist together. One is going to win, one is going to lose. You cannot cease to aspire to the elites and have the elites continue to take on your art. So that's why Sinatra, when he sang Eleanor Rigby and when he sang Something in the Way She Moved, just sounded ridiculous. He couldn't do it because he was coming from a generation where that aspiration was still in place. What I was noticing, even as a kid, was that the end of the great American moment was coming, right? The end of the moment when we thought, yes, we have got generation after generation to move, it was flexible, right? We were moving into the elites. You could come from Hoboken and become the elites, but you wanted to do that. You didn't want to remain. You didn't want to keep your working class attitudes and say, she loves you, yeah, and it's been a hard day's night. You wanted to move up to I Get No Kick from Champagne, and that was over. And this doesn't happen in every generation. It happened in our generation because there was a sense that America was not a perfect country, that the things that we had been taught were untrue, that there was racism in America, the Vietnam War was a terrible mistake. And so there was this kind of shift, and that our fathers and mothers who had been in this great generation, there may have been a feeling too that we couldn't live up to them, so we were just going to toss their values out. But this was the collapse of that moment. Now, let me pause here before I go on with the music and just remind you of a show I did, 2 or 3 shows back about Paradise Lost, the famous poem by John Milton, right? The famous poem about the fall of man. Milton participated in the English Civil War, after which the King, Charles, was beheaded, and Milton approved of his beheading and was almost killed himself when the Restoration came and they brought in the new king. And then he wrote Paradise Lost about the rebellion of Satan against the king of heaven and earth. And his point was, and he made it very explicit, was that you can rebel against a human king because a human king is only there because we're sinful, but you can't rebel against the king of heaven. You can't rebel against God because then you become satanic, then you become evil. And rebelling against God is not just rebelling against the church, because Milton was rebelling against the Catholic Church. He was a Puritan. It's not rebelling against the church. It's rebelling against the entire idea that nature has an ordained meaning, that men and women have, that it means something that there are men and women, that it means something that we die, that it means something that we live and that we're embodied and that we're gendered and all those things. It's rebelling against that entire meaning of life, that other level of meaning of life. And once you start to do that, Milton's point was, you become evil. So you can rebel against human things, like rebelling against the elites, like rebelling against Fred Astaire and Frank Sinatra and Cole Porter. You can rebel against them, but once you take it into that next step where you're rebelling against the great elite, the fact of creation, the godly fact of creation, you become evil, and people slip from one to the other. It's the difference between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. The American Revolution was a revolution against the British elite, but it maintained the values, the aspiration to be an elite culture and a good culture. It just added freedom into the mix, more liberty, more motion into the mix. The French Revolution was a revolution against the church, a revolution against God, a revolution against the entire idea of the culture, and it was a paradise lost, satanic revolution that ended the way all those revolutions do, with bloodshed and murder and people killing each other. So this brings me finally to the Grammys and WAP, right? This song by Cardi B that she sang with Megan Thee Stallion, I think, where they got on and just really, really degraded themselves. They degraded themselves. They acted in this animalistic, hypersexualized way. And of course, the critics think, oh, what a wonderful thing this was. But it was just sad. I mean, it's just pitiful to see someone not without talent, somebody who can dance, somebody who can sing, degrading herself to this point, and also showing young girls and young people that this is what you are. You are an animal. You're just a sexual creature. Your sex is not involved in any kind of human interplay. It was not, as Matt Walsh said last night, it was not sexy. It was just kind of pitiful. And here's, we can't show too much of it because it's obscene, but here's just a brief clip of it.
Whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. Hold up. I said certified freak 7 days a week. Wet ass P-word. Make that pull-out game weak. P-word. P-word is female genitalia.
Cardi B looked different, I thought, at the Grammys. It may have been the yarmulke, but look, it's degrading. It's trash music. It's crap lyrics. It's almost a form of grunting when you think that we're coming from flying too high with some guy in the sky and your fabulous face to this kind of it's garbage, and it's not being cranky. Oh, everything used to be wonderful. It's just charting a progression of an idea where people start out by rebelling against the elite and they slip into rebelling against their own humanity and the higher meaning of creation. So why does this happen? And this is ultimately the point I want to get to, because this is relevant to all of us. This is the Andrew Klavan theory of why this happens, drawn from my own experience, but also drawn from my observation of other people. It's just speculation, but because it's my speculation, we know it's 100% correct. And the way that I see this is that we are all born with a sense of the good and the bad. We're all born with a sense of God. We're born with what with an idea inside us, implanted inside us, is what good God looks like, because we're made in His image. We all have this inside us. A few weeks ago, I got a letter from a mailbag letter from a woman who said, I've been so abused. How can I trust God to be good when so much evil has happened to me? And really, the question is always, how would you even know the difference between good and evil if you weren't born with a sense of God within you? And when you see your mother, she's supposed to be tender and nurturing and merciful, and your father is supposed to be strong and honest and just, and we know that they represent something from another place. We know that they represent some mysterious division in the person of God between male and female, certain traits that are important. We know they're supposed to be like this, and we know when they fail. And of course, they all fail. All our parents fail. And so here's the situation. If you have a good religious upbringing, not just any religious upbringing, but a true religious upbringing, when you start to realize that your parents are human and they're imperfect and they're not the God you came into the world looking for, you can shift that allegiance, not take it away from them. You don't have to take it away from them, but see through them to the good God that they represent, both mother and father, both male and female that they represent. If you don't have that, there's nothing. Once you rebel against them, you can rebel against anything. You're just into the darkness. You are going to establish your own self. You're going to define your own self. You're going to define the meaning of nature. You're going to define the meaning of gender. You're going to define all those things. And then you've gotten into paradise lost territory and you slip. You slip through into evil. You slip through into evil. And this is the thing. You start out by saying, screw your top hat, white tie and tails, and you end up stripped naked, shouting about your genitalia like an animal, right? And that's the progression. Not because you rebelled against an elite that has failed, but because you failed to see that what that elite failed to do was to represent the good God who orders nature to his liking and to his goodness. And so you slip through the true rebellion, the fair rebellion, into a rebellion against creation itself. And that's the place where we are